Hi, I'm Ben Reinberg. We had a lot of terrific guests and conversations this year on I Own It. I want to thank you for listening and sharing your thoughts and feedback with me. As we approach the end of the year, I want to reshare portions of some of my favorite conversations on the podcast this year. This is a chance for you to catch up on great conversations you may have missed. And if it happens to be an episode you've heard before, you could re-listen or fast forward to the next conversation. Thank you, and I wish you happy holidays.
Welcome to the I Own It podcast with Ben Reinberg.
Well, in point of fact, there's all sorts of analysis to do while you're waiting. There's predictable dialogue. There's an assessment of the situation. And so it's not really, there really isn't any waiting if you're thinking, if you're preparing. And one of the most impressive people I ever saw among those that I learned from, the Waco series, American Apocalypse, has been on Netflix recently. One of the people featured in that was Gary Nestor, my former boss, and I learned a lot from him. But in a much smaller role, who wasn't featured in it at all because they couldn't put everybody in. Negotiator Byron Sage was one of the principal speakers in that case. And after Waco, I remember Byron, they were working a fugitive case, and they were looking for a fugitive from the Olympic Park bombing in Atlanta. And they set up all this predicted dialogue and what would they say if he said this. And they never even talked to this guy, but all did a massive amount of assessment and analysis and preparation while they were waiting. And I was really impressed with the proactive nature of that. What's he likely to say? Let's just not figure out one thing. Let's figure out several different decision trees, if you will, and then we'll prepare along those lines. So the waiting is actually an opportunity to prepare.
Okay, well, early in your career, what were the most challenging skills for you to learn?
Wow. There's a pivot point depending upon the person on the other side. Now, the listening and we used to call it emotion labels, and we call it now the Black Swan method for all negotiations, just labeling. It's an analytical process to try to get at what's really driving somebody emotionally, get in depth with them. And simultaneously, if they're an extremely manipulative type, you need to rotate completely out of that and ask what we call calibrated questions. What or how questions, like what's this, what good is this really doing you? Or how do your actions match up with what you say you want? Now that's a pretty big pivot. And I got really good, and I still am very good at the emotion labeling, the labeling. Seems like something's on your mind is an example of a label. Seems like you have a reason for thinking that is a way to challenge somebody on their thinking without making them feel challenged. And to drop that entirely and shift over to these almost confrontational questions, but legitimate, that's always been a challenge for me.
So in addition to what you just shared, Chris, share with our listeners a flavor for some exciting moments you had as an FBI negotiator.
Oh, wow. The Chase Manhattan bank robbery, which was the first movie-like hostage siege that I was ever involved in. And, bank robberies with hostages, well, they happen on TV all the time. They're really extremely rare events in real life. Usually the bank robberies are gone long before law enforcement shows up. Bank robbers are almost never caught inside the bank. And when this happened in New York City, it had been 20 years since the last time it happened in New York. I mean, these are really rare events. And so just sitting down at that was a challenge. And I wanted to drop into my trading. I spent a lot of time in trading and preparation. You fall to your highest level of preparation. You got to trade. Tiger Woods practices on the practice tees all the time. And then in the middle of it, out of the blue, our bad guy put a hostage on the phone, like unasked for, completely unexpectedly. And, It caught me off guard, didn't know what to do. We ultimately got everybody out, but there were several moments in there where I was just like completely caught off guard by what happened. And in hindsight, it was, I don't want to say exhilarating, it was enormously satisfying.
Yeah, it becomes more fulfilling and you can walk away. And I think what a lot of people lose insight on negotiations is that you might see that person again, especially in my business, commercial real estate. You deal with a broker or a seller, or I deal with medical properties all day long around the United States. You might run into that hospital system again. And people remember certain aspects of a negotiations. That's a great point that you brought up. How did you name it the Black Swan Group? Like, how did that name come about?
Well, when I left the FBI back in 2007, and I don't know if you remember this movie, Rodney Dangerfield went back to school. The old guy goes back to school.
Yep,
Well, I kind of did the
relentless.
Rodney Dangerfield thing, the guy who's like 10 times older than everybody else in class. That was me, practical guy. And at about the same time, Nassim Nicholas Taleb wrote a book called The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable. And I thought, yeah, great negotiation techniques that has, those are small changes that nobody notices, but the impact is incredible. And then the unknown unknowns, the things that you discover in the negotiation that'll change everything. The impact of the highly improbable is awesome. And I love the metaphor and I was inspired by it. That's why we named the company the Black Swan Group.
Yeah, I've used that technique you taught, and it's done wonders for me in negotiations on purchase and sale agreements, leases, and so I love it. It's just an incredible. It's a brilliant technique. And I've seen it firsthand, the success it creates. So, when you work with executives, Chris, what are the areas of negotiation they tend to be the weakest at, and how do you help them improve?
Well, they might not be good at actually listening. Like that's probably across the board one of the biggest problems. People are not always listening to understand because they're afraid that understanding is agreement, and it is not. Like I can understand where you're coming from and disagree with it strongly, not even like it, but I can understand it. And a lot of people are poor at understanding, listening to understand. They're listening while they're thinking. They're listening to contradict. They're listening to argue. They're listening to get an aha. Here's where you're wrong. Listening to correct. That's a real common problem. And then very few people really understand the power of influence that you gain in relationship building if somebody feels heard. Like most people say, well, what good is it going to do if I make them feel heard? Well, they're more likely to agree with you once they feel heard. And it's very counterintuitive for a lot of people.
Just the truth. I mean, I think all of us, it's like one of the things I had to work on when I was younger and I started developing in business to get to where I am today was not understanding what people were saying to me. I would listen to the words, but I couldn't understand the truth behind it. Once I started understanding the truth, I had those aha moments like now I can build that bridge to connect with someone.
Well
So,
said.
so as you know, I run a commercial real estate investment firm. And hypothetically, if I were to become your client, how would you approach teaching negotiations to someone like me who has already a ton of experience? Based on your experience, where would be the areas of negotiation that someone like me may be less knowledgeable about?
Well, there's going to be several things that are really brilliant that you're already doing. A couple things that we'd ask for you to unlearn, and then probably a couple things that we'd ask for you to add to your skill set. Now, the diagnosis is going to be which is which. Like, I've never run into any really experienced person when we've shared the 9 skills or the 2 or 3 essential strategies. When at some point in time they haven't said, like, "Yeah, man, I've been doing that for a while," and that's almost always true. I just don't know up front which one of those it is. So, we're going to interact with you a little bit. We're gonna sort of feel where your mindset is and try to get a feel for whether we need a mindset shift or just start adding skills to your list. It's going to be one or the other. And so we'll a bit of a diagnosis of where you are right now, and then see how open you are to learning.
Is that an issue where people are putting up like a glass wall because of their beliefs and it's hard to be coachable or to be vulnerable in front of you because they feel like they've had success and they feel like their way has worked for them? Is that a struggle with some of your clients just to be able to kind of lower the barriers and say, all right, Chris, I'm yours. I am going to be coachable. I am going to be your guy. I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I'm going to listen. I'm just going to apply the work and see the results happen.
It's a struggle. It's definitely a struggle for some. It's definitely a struggle for some, and a hard part for some people, and in particular, get people out of the yes business.
We've had other guests on the show with books called things like The YouTube Formula. And then obviously Brendan Kane of How I Built 1 Million Followers in 30 Days. That's what spurred the interest and why I feel that sometimes it needs to be discussed of like, what is the best formula to get engagement?
Well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
There is a level where you want to make sure that you have base foundations and structures, but that gets you at the baseline. If you want to be a disruptor and an innovator in the industry, you have to have personalized strategies. And so that's kind of the difference. Like, yes, you can scale to a certain number, but most people need a personalized strategy. Most companies need a personalized strategy in order to grow and really take hold in the space and have kind of a future-proof brand.
Okay. Well, as our brand, we have core values: transparency, integrity, consistency, and expertise in what we do. And we're, say, the leading experts in office industrial retail with a focus on medical office. So we are experts in medical office ownership and investing.
Perfect. So with that, do you do a lot of conversation, just out of curiosity, with medical spaces or like with people in the medical field outside of the commercial?
Sometimes. So could we do more? Absolutely. Which would be a good idea.
Right. So what I like to do when we're working with a new brand is just kind of get to know both you as a person, the leadership team, the founder, the face of the brand, and then your team. And we'll do kickoff exercises to get to know, kind of like what you were talking about, y'all were doing earlier.
Right.
To get to know what really matters to you at the core, and then figure out how that aligns with your products and your partnerships in place, and kind of building an ecosystem around that. So we talk about, we build worlds around your brand. That's a big part of it. We look at what your touch points are, if there are any places where people could understand you better, and you could be getting more revenue from that area. We want to be tapping into that. Okay. And also building out at the same time your long-term place for brands. So looking at that long-term vision.
So you've been recognized for a lot of awards, being a top CMO, besides doing great work for your clients. What's been your approach to your personal brand to get so many recognitions to date?
It sounds silly, but being a nice person generally.
Okay. That's good.
I feel like I am always open to giving advice to people. I'm not a person who gatekeeps. Obviously, I don't share things that are within NDAs around client projects, but in terms of knowledge in the industry and where somebody could go, I'm always very open. And I like socializing with other people and talking to them about what their problems are and how we can work together, or how they might be able to solve it. Like with different awards, I feel like that comes through people just finding us on the internet, seeing that what we're doing is very authentic to who we are, and not trying to be something we're not, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Well, your company materials talk a lot about outside the box ideas, right? And so I'm curious, how do you approach fostering your personal creativity? And are there certain places or times a day where you're the most creative? We just went through this exercise the other day. How do you mentally manage between the stresses of management and execution versus creating the right mental space? Because, during the day, you want to be able to unleash your creativity.
Right. So it's interesting that you bring up outside the box thinking, because what actually helps me be more creative is to build a box first. Is to figure out what our guidelines are of this is us, this isn't us, what we're trying to do, what we're not trying to do. and get an idea of the scope that we need to be creative in. It's kind of like, this is a very silly example, but let's think like, for me, like 20 years ago, almost back in college, when you'd have a party and somebody says, think of come as something that starts with the letter P. You can be infinitely creative because you have guidelines, versus Halloween, where you would never know what to wear because there's too many options.
That's right.
So it's about kind of narrowing your options into what feels like it's in your world and in your realm, and then building in that ecosystem.
So what's your favorite client to work with? Like, what type of client do you enjoy working with, and what are some great stories you could share?
My favorite type of client to work with are companies that have spent so much time focusing on their product and making something really good that they wanted themselves, that they are in a really strong position, but they might not know how to best position it. And I know that's very vague, but it's oftentimes the people that are focused more on doing something to help others are not focused on the ego of building a business, which you see a lot today. Where sometimes people say they want to be a business owner, but it's because they want to feel valued and feel like they have an autonomy and an ownership over their life, when in reality, when you own a business, as you know, you are beholden to everybody.
That's right.
You're much more of a servant
Yes.
than you are a boss.
That's
right?
right. Tell me about how you feel about fostering your personal creativity. There's a certain time of days that you're focusing on where you're in your genius and saying, here are the times that I shine during the day.
So every day I will take as many walks as I can in between meetings, because I think better when I'm moving. I like to take my dog, and we have a beautiful little nature preserve near our house. And I'll go outside and I'll take my phone, and I won't trip because there's a trail. I won't walk into traffic because there's a trail. But I will start reading the articles from the day and the newsletters I subscribe to, just to start getting my brain working so that it starts making connections.
Got it.
The other challenge is I typically think really creatively in the evening and after everyone's gone to bed. So that's when I work on projects where we're really coming up with a new campaign idea and we're stuck, is at night.
Okay.
Just because there's no interruptions and the world is asleep, so you feel like you have the space to just sit down and relax.
I'm sure as a marketer, you notice how people's attraction span seems to have gotten shorter with the age of smartphones. I think we all can agree with that. Obviously, people still read books, but less than they're used to, right? So I was wondering when I was researching, like, if shorter attention spans were the key consideration when you developed their marketing strategy. How did that work for you when you brought them on as a client?
So I was in film, and then I was in digital publishing before starting the agency. And so with this e-commerce brand, I helped grow to be the number one independent ebook company in the world, and the third largest behind Amazon and Barnes & Noble, which at the time were huge still. It was all about finding the niche audiences, which is actually what we're seeing today. And this was probably, 10 years ago at this point. And where attention spans were waning, but we were some of the first, I think we did and created the first online book signing. So it's very simple.
How did you come up with the name of your company, Dos Mundos? You know, you've been running it for 8 years now. And so how'd you come up with the name, and like, what are the goals for Dos Mundos over the next approximately, say, 5 years?
Okay. Those are all, first of all, our goals are lofty. But the name actually came from my former business partner and good friend, Margaret. So originally we started Dos Mundos, and I would have never started a company. That's just never was something that was interesting to me, because it seemed like a lot of work, and it seemed like a lot of responsibility.
It is a lot of work.
One of the things that matters really deeply to me with Dos Mundos is making sure that we're fostering creativity, and people feel very respected in the environment, because that's where you get the good ideas. People do a lot of very short-term actions and try things that actually cause big losses for the company because they haven't built an ecosystem that really helps. And so we like to make sure that we're doing that by building these worlds. And Dos Mundos has oddly evolved into what we needed it to be. So that's how the name came about. And I feel bad just monologuing here, but there's 3 questions I'm trying to get.
Well, what's the plans for the next 5 years? Like, you said you had lofty goals. What are the goals?
Our goal is that with every product we do, we're adding value rather than taking away from the community. And so we have this ecosystem of trademark lawyers, financial strategists, developers, AR, VR, kind of across, actually like in Brazil, Sweden, like across the planet, to make sure that once we're done with the project, we can be offering you people within our realm that we trust, that we've worked with, that can also help keep it moving. Because a lot of times the problem is that with agencies, they hand something off and they leave.
That's right.
And somebody doesn't know what to do with it. And so we want to make sure that we're giving you the help that you need.
How do you approach being an influencer? Like, I'm more of an expert. People are like, you're an influencer. I'm like, I'm not an influencer. I'm an expert. I am a commercial real estate icon. That's what I do. I own and manage my company, commercial real estate, around the United States. That's all I know and love. That's my expertise. But how do you approach being an influencer in terms of how you promote brands, and what are some of the brands you're working with?
I never really considered myself an influencer either. The only thing that makes me an influencer is I have a following. So my voice carries a little louder, I guess, than the average guy. Not anywhere near louder than people that I follow as influencers, right? There's different stages to it. I'm more interested in following people like you because, that's the world I'm in. I'm in construction, in multifamily properties and commercial properties. So I like to learn. I like to hear your insight. I like to learn from that. In my ways, like, I get approached by brands often. It's like, hey, promote this protein powder, promote this. And I really don't want to get typecasted as that guy.
I'm the same way. When I was in my 20s, my first deal was an industrial deal in Chicago. That's where I'm from. Oh, yeah. And I remember I bought this. It was a 210 industrial building. First week, Shervin, I lose 45% of the income. The guy moves out. First deal was in my 20s. Signed recourse on a loan that my godfather got me. And I had to respond, and we filled it. I backfilled it with 2 other tenants. It became a 3-tent building. We sold it for, since you're in multifamily, I'll use an X multiple, since you guys like to use that jargon compared to us with IRRs and all that. It was a 2.85 times on the money. That was my first deal. And that's what launched me. I was really young at the time. I pulled a horseshoe out of my ass and it worked. And that's what launched me. And we built millions of square feet since, and own a lot of properties. It was always a pain in the ass because, like, I remember in Chicago, especially at the office, we'd have these old computers and we'd be like, what do we do with all these now? They're outdated. We're getting everyone new computers or new monitors. And it was just constant brain damage. And it was always bringing it to the local municipality, and they would take it off your hands. And we would be like, thank you. So I think that's cool that you create a business out of it, because for years, I'm 53 years old. I started the business when I was in my early 20s. For years, we couldn't figure out what we do with this technology. And he was telling me, because I had to step in, the landlord was being a little bit different. These guys have jobs and now they have salaries, and, landlords are tough on them. Like, need this security deposit. One of the kids wasn't working. And so I had to step in and say, look, as a landlord, even though I'm not in the multifamily space, I still have logic everywhere we own around the country. I said, would you rather have a larger security deposit? I said, let's say the worst case happened. They default. It's not going to happen because Joey's not going to default and his roommates aren't. But let's say they default and you get 3 to 6 months security deposit. Wouldn't you rather have a large security? You're not going to sue these kids and go after them. You can get nothing. So you might as well get a large security deposit. But it's amazing to me, the demand up in your area for apartments and how fast they go. It's like an anomaly because we own commercial real estate around the country. And I have a lot of friends of mine, they're icons in multifamily space. And it just amazes me how the velocity of units turn in Los Angeles County in those areas. And here's what's funny about, look at your situation. You fall ass backwards into entertainment.
Yeah.
You know, when think about it, you have a lot of young people that are talented, that are looking to get into your side of the business, and you didn't really have to try too hard. Yeah. And so it's kind of interesting how that works out of fate, the universe.
100%. That's a prime example of, I guess, right time, right place. It just worked out. Hey, you know, when we first started that company, we were only using the post office. And there's a position at the post office that somebody sits in Sacramento. They're called the Grand Master. The Grand Master of the Postal Service. And I guess it's an elected position.
That's right. Well, that's just life. And so with the multifamily investing you do, with the amount of demand and limited supply, I'd have to imagine a lot of the investors are holding these properties for a long period of time. And when they do sell, are the yields really low when they come on the market, expensive, and because they know that they're valuable and there's barriers to entry to get in? There's going to be $1.4 trillion in the next 18 months of commercial real estate mortgages. So there will be opportunities, even in Los Angeles. There will be opportunities, Shervin, coming, and you should have some great opportunities ahead of you. So keep your powder dry. What we do is we own and manage a large portion of our portfolio. Of the 3 decades I've been doing this, when I started this company, for almost 2 decades, we started investing in a little niche called medical office. And it's grown since. I was criticized as a young man to invest in medical office because they were talking about socialized medicine and where were these doctors going to go, and et cetera, et cetera. And then 6 years ago, we got involved in veterinary office, and great. So our niche is really pandemic and recession resilient, which I love. But in multifamily, one of the challenges was, especially in Los Angeles, and it goes back to the political side of things, is where you have these moratorium, these eviction laws that you can't evict your tenants. And so how did that play out? Did that affect you at all? Or do you have any colleagues where you had tenants that were part of those eviction stories in the COVID process? And they're
still protected.
Let's talk about this insurance. I mean, insurance, and I could tell you in our business, from all the states we own, especially coastal states, whether it's Florida, Texas, you name it, Alabama, you know, up and down, south, southeast, we have a large presence as well. Insurance has gone through the roof around the country. Insane. How is it affecting your tenants and your investments? What do you do? Because, you know, your net operating income is getting hammered. And what do the lenders do, Shervin? Because it's like, well, wait a minute. We said to you, we'd have a debt service coverage of, say, 1.25. It could be 1.35, whatever. Well, you can't control what goes on in the environment. You can't control what goes on in the political environment and weather. And next thing you know, we've seen policies that have doubled, where it could be a $30,000 policy. It's now 90, 100. We're seeing that. I think I'll go the other way. I think we're in for a big adjustment.
Yeah.
With all the loans coming due. Yeah, we're refinancing properties right now that are cash flowing, and the lenders are difficult. And these are lenders I've had 20-year relationships with. It's insane because the conversations aren't logical. What they are is they're getting pressure by the government and to clean up their portfolios, because they're like, well, wait a minute, we don't care that you have a medical property in one of the best areas in the United States. We need to clean up our portfolio. So it's not logical business. They're getting outside pressure from whether it's the government, their borrowing capacity, how much they can lend, their bottom line to their shareholders. Are they public? Are they not? So all these different banks and lenders around the country are struggling because they're trying to figure out, how do I clean up my CRE portfolio? But I'm also going to lose business from a company like Alliance Ben, who could feed us a lot of loans and operating accounts to loan off their money. And you're seeing that. It's interesting. So what I see is, in our business, one thing I appreciate is commercial real estate can really give you the tell. It's like a poker game. It's the tell of what's probably coming down the pike. Well, trouble's coming. Loans are coming due. People are going to be giving back property. People have started giving back property. Some of them don't even want to renew their loans. So what do? You have to restructure. They go into forbearance agreements. And so all this stuff is starting to happen. And guess what? Lines of credit for businesses start tightening too. And then unemployment increases. And it's a domino effect. And so it's going to be very interesting to see 2024 to me in the fourth quarter, I expect, and that there's going to be a lot of buying opportunities. And so, yes. And so with our new fund, the Alliance Medical Property Fund, the reason why it has so much interest for people to invest is because they're saying, we see the opportunities. We say, okay, well, we have a conservative asset class like medical properties with upside. So maybe you project 14 to 18%. Well, the returns are probably going to be 18 to 22, 23. We've averaged 24% IRR in our career. So you look at these things for a conservative asset and people are saying, we understand because we understand there's going to be opportunities. Someone's going to have to sell a property. There's going to be more sale leaseback transactions because people need to raise cash. So I predict you're going to see a lot of opportunities. I think unemployment's going to go up. They're going to hold on for dear life because it's an election year. So we're going to see how that plays out. So interesting times ahead for this country in commercial real estate. But I agree with you. There's going to be some wealth opportunities building in this market. This is Ben Reinberg. I want to thank you again for listening to the I Own It podcast. Happy holidays and a healthy and profitable new year.
Thank you for listening to the I Own It podcast with Ben Reinberg. To hear our past episodes and connect with Ben, visit benreinberg.com.